I think it's really beautiful in an age where so many owners of sports teams are the worst. I could just be a Packers fan. That's a beautiful thing. And that's my soapbox.
From the other Packers
Yes.
fan at the table, Emma, is that how we see things?
Absolutely, I just couldn't agree more. I have to say, I feel for Cowboys fans and dealing with, like, an owner that can be,
I think Jerry Jones is very egalitarian.
um
How many championships has he allowed the rest of the league to have?
That is a excellent point. That is an excellent point. But imagine being stuck in a franchise where it all came down to Jerry Jones. But it is very inspiring to be able to look and be like, oh, it's owned by the people.
Nothing like an organization owned by the people that employed Mike McCarthy to be their head coach before Jerry Jones decided that was a good idea. Elise, from our resident Lions fan, anything we want to say about this?
I would like to say that it is our year. That's all I have to say.
You know what? As a Lions fan, you haven't had a chance to say that very much in your life. So,
It's true.
well, I mean, I'm glad that we've got the NFC North very, very well running here.
Yeah.
Nothing like being in Arizona and having the NFC North well represented. That seems very appropriate.
Not a single. I've gone to college at Arizona State University for about 2.5 years now, and I've yet to meet a really passionate Arizona Cardinals fan.
I was at the Cardinals-Niners game on the weekend, and I can tell you that there were very few passionate Cardinals
Yeah.
fans. There are a lot of passionate Niners fans.
Mhm.
So if you're listening to this, if you're from Phoenix, if you're from the Valley, if you're from Arizona, become a passionate Cardinals fan.
And if you are a passionate Cardinals fan, reach out to us. We want to hear from you. We want verification of your existence. So send us an email with that, or go to our website cai.asu.edu and let us know that you're out there, because we're worried.
Hello and welcome to Politics in the Past. This is going to be another Gen Z roundtable, one of our, I think, favorite features that we've got. With me, we have Jack, Elise, and a newcomer, Emma. Emma, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Emma. I'm a senior here at Arizona State. I've been with the club for just a couple semesters now. With Politics and Leadership Club, it's been a great experience. And I'm from Austin, Texas, but I've been out here in Arizona for this is my 4th year.
So you're from Austin, Texas, and you're a Packers fan.
Right, I know. It was passed down to me by my father.
By your
Well,
father and your
my
father and his
father.
father and his father's father and his pappy and his pappy's pappy.
Indeed, not a lot to root for in Nebraska.
We've had Jack and Elise on before, but maybe it's worth you guys introducing yourselves again. Elise, let's start with you.
My name is Elise Johnson. I'm also a senior at ASU. I'm an economics major, like Jack, not to steal your thunder. This is my second time on the podcast, and I'm a vice president of Politics and Leadership Club.
All right, I am Jack Hinrichs. I am the same major as Elise. I'm an econ major. I'm a junior here at Arizona State University, vice president of the Politics and Leadership Club, and like Elise, I am a researcher at the Center for American Institutions.
Right on. Well, thank you very much for making time to join us. I know that the people who listen to this podcast, and we're growing. We're growing, trying to get more and more people to listen to it. One of the things that I think is unique about being at Arizona State University and at the Center for American Institutions is an opportunity to speak with college students and to understand your generation's approach to politics, your understanding of politics. And well, you're already affecting elections. Your generation is already affecting elections. And one of the issues that we've heard again and again, earlier this week, we had Caroline Downey and Daniel DiMartino in Caroline Downey from National Review and Daniel DiMartino from the Manhattan Institute to talk about Gen Z politics generally. And the issue that they kept coming back to was the gender divide. And it is something that is in the news a lot. The idea that women are becoming more left-wing and men are becoming more right-wing, particularly in Gen Z. Before we go any further with that, let me just ask you, Emma, starting with you, does that sort of equate with your own experience? And again, I'm not looking for you to analyze yourself. I'm kind of looking for a broader analysis of the trends that you see.
I would say broadly, I think that characterization is kind of more so taken from the internet and seeing like just how divided the internet culture is. But I'd say more so in like the people I actually know. While I do know a lot of my like young women friends are on the left side, and I do have noticed a trend of some of my male friends moving further to the right. It's in a far less extreme way than I think is often like characterized. And I think also it's a little less politically polarized than, I think it actually appears, like, in real life.
Okay, so that
So
there's this like there's the online phenomenon
Mhm.
that is really polarized
Yes.
and really radicalized, but in real life it is a lot maybe more complicated and maybe not as extreme.
Ye
Elise, moving to you. What do you think?
I would agree that online is a different indicator than real life, because I have a lot of friends all over the political spectrum, and I have noticed that my male friends tend to drift a little more to the right. But I haven't noticed a lot of my female friends drifting to the left. So I think it is exacerbated by the online conversation, but I do see it happening, just not on a huge scale in my personal circle.
Jack?
I agree with the growing consensus that it is more predominant online. Um, and I think that this phenomenon has everything to do with social media and what of it does exist in the real world. And there are kernels of truth in it. Um, ultimately come from social media. What I've noticed in my own life is that individuals, particularly the young men who are moving to the right, and I have seen some examples of that, they are falling further and further into sort of social media silos, ideological silos, further into that manosphere. And I know that that's something that both Caroline Downey and Daniel DiMartino talked about last night.
Okay. Now, a lot of the discussion earlier this week was, and that I think we've seen highlighted online, has been about the men moving to the right. Really, that has tended to dominate conversation, and less so the women moving to the left, at least from what I've seen. So we'll start by talking about men and then move to the right. But I really do want to make sure we reserve a lot of time to chat about what it is that's leading women to move to the left. But let me ask the ladies at the table. Why do you think it is that there's been this move of men more towards the right, even if it is more of an online phenomenon?
I would say part of what, the speakers, from Tuesday's discussion did talk about was just, some of the, I believe, cultural resentment of men and this transition of equalization of just, like, the law and stuff for women. I think as that has progressed and women just like are coming into like STEM roles and things like this, they hear about it a lot. And every time they hear about it, it seems to be taken in a zero sum gain perspective, as if women are like becoming more involved, there's less opportunities for me. That's my understanding of most of what has caused the men to move farther to the right. It seems more reactionary and countercultural because things are moving on without them and they felt forgotten.
I would generally agree with your characterization. I do think part of it is a response to the more radical feminist movement, because obviously you're not going to have men out there, well, not very many men out there saying women shouldn't have the same job that I do. But I think they're sort of thinking, where's my where's my zone? Because I feel like, at least in terms of, I don't know, the farming and stuff back in the 20th century when we actually had farms and stuff, it was like the men that would go out and plow the fields or whatever. Typically, like there were jobs that men would do more, and like blacksmithing and stuff. But as we've innovated, we don't have the jobs that require as much physical labor. So it's like everybody can do them easily, and so I think they're looking for, where do I belong now?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. I'm going to ask the ladies one more question, then Jack, I'm going to pivot to you. Do you see a class divide among men?
I certainly feel like I do. We've seen just like Democratic Republican split of college educated voters being far more divisive this last in the 2024 election. From my understanding, it was a little more drastic than it has previously been. I will say most of my friends who are men who are in school tend to be far more center to center left. All of my male friends who are not enrolled in school are all of my conservative male friends. And I do think that there's I think a class divide is evident but in the younger generations as well.
Elise?
I haven't noticed that quite as much. I do know some conservative men at school. I would say I know more conservative women at school, interestingly. But I would agree, like, my male friends in, like, more trade or military positions tend to be farther to the right than do the ones at school.
Interesting. Jack?
I agree with the vast majority of what's been said. Where the effect on education in bringing people further to the left, that's well documented throughout history. And
Don't know about that, but that's okay.
okay, well, another conversation for another time. In going like further into the gender divide, that's something that's always sort of been present. I remember growing up, I'd work the Minnehaha County, South Dakota Democratic booth at the fair, and I did that for years and years and years and years and years. And about the most common thing we'd see is a older couple that would walk by, 60s, 70s, and a husband that would ignore us entirely, and a wife who would give us a small smile. And that would happen, I don't know, 20 times a day. And it happened all throughout my childhood. And so it is becoming more drastic. And I agree with what both Emma and Elise said, with sort of watching it play out in real time with some people I've known. That's a shared experience we have. But my only addition to that would be, in my experience, I've seen it even in older people.
So it's not just the Gen Z phenomenon. It's
Yeah, Gen Z maybe is more so.
but Gen Z is also more online.
Yes, certainly.
Right. Okay. So I mean, I think that there's definitely something there in the fear, I think, to some degree of men, of well, we were talking before we decided to come on. Before we actually started this conversation, we were chatting a little bit about, are men afraid of women and are women afraid of men? And so maybe what we're seeing to some degree is just a political manifestation of that. I mean, you didn't get a chance to weigh in on that. I'll ask these guys to weigh in on that again. Are men afraid of women and are women afraid of men?
I will say both, but in absolutely different ways. And I don't think it's completely fair to compare them. We were talking about dating in Tuesday's discussion as well. And just some of what was being discussed is Gen Z's risk tolerance and dating aversion, things like this. Women are scared of men because men can kill women very commonly on first dates, things like this. Women, and then men are scared of women in, like, I think, the traditional way. It can go both ways in the just like social fear and scares and things like this. But I think when we're just getting into this discussion, like ignoring the fact that like women are genuinely scared of men. Like I am genuinely scared of men to an extent. Not in the way that I'm nervous to be around them and talk to them and like my peers, but like I think we get along the conversation about people saying all men, things like this. I think it's important to understand that there's both the social fear that is common and back and forth and totally fair and expected in young adults and things like that. And then the fear, the real safety risk is still evident for young women like myself. Not all, it can't speak for all young women, but that's why.
No, that's totally fair. Elise?
I feel like something that adds to that is like online dating, because you don't know somebody before you agree to meet them. And so, like, for me personally, I would be terrified to go meet a guy that I met online because he could have his wrong picture up, have lied about his age, you know, all this stuff. And I'm not saying like that's just a man problem, but like I feel like you have less women on the dating apps who are trying to go out and get a man to rob or something like that. So I feel like that fear could be decreased by meeting in person. But I think since Gen Z is so much online and so much on social media and stuff, it's just so much easier to meet somebody online, which then I think contributes to a lack of trust.
Sure. Jack, do you want to jump in?
I agree with everything that's been said. The history of gender violence is, I struggle to think of an adjective that fully encompasses how disgusting it's been. And it's a good thing that we're reckoning with that, finally, to a degree. Beyond that, I would agree with what Elise said about being on dating apps and the uncertainty that causes. Everything like dating via dating apps increases that uncertainty, makes everything feel so much more. It's not as tangible, or it's synthetic, it's fake, it's not what you would imagine when you're growing up learning about love or relationships from TV or movies. It's not that. And I think that a lot of the uncertainty and a lot of the growing divide between men and women in Gen Z can be attributed to the fact that the way that they meet in a romantic context is through a screen. And that's the de facto position.
Fair enough. I'm going to take a little piece one by one here, as is my want. Emma, you make a really good point. First of all, on the completely realistic fear that I think women of all generations have always had of the physical danger presented by men. But I do think there is this issue where there was an assumption for a while that all men are inherently dangerous and were treated by institutions, at least, as inherently dangerous, and that therefore their behavior needed to be curbed, like, proactively, when most men, certainly in a university setting, most men were raised pretty, were raised in decent households, were raised to be pretty good guys, and knew that already, and didn't need that. And by having it shoved down their throat to a certain degree, and this expectation or this assumption that they were dangerous, creates this resentment and this reaction. Your point about it being, your point is very important. And I think that what we see on both sides, or among everybody, is this universalizing of our own experience. And I do think that at the heart of our politics and sometimes our worst divides are this notion of we universalize our own experiences, which is why I think civil discourse is so important, because it's only through discourse and through civil discourse and reading that we can create this imagined sympathy for others, right? That doesn't necessarily square with our own experience, but is very true for others. And Elise, just building on your point about, how dating apps can make people nervous about meeting each other. As nerve-wracking as it is to meet through a dating app, through a screen, people used to meet by getting intoxicated in bars and meeting people.
Yeah.
And that came with its own inherent sense of dangers. So, not saying that one's necessarily better than the other, but there may actually be more control in that women may actually have, to some degree, more control over their dating experience via dating apps than they may have before. Sorry, feel free to respond. Emma, I should have let you respond. I'm so sorry.
That's a really good point, and I do agree, because this is gonna sound so strange, but if you have a dating app and you have their name in their picture, you can usually find them on social media, which is what me and my cousin did when she met a guy on I forget which dating app, but she pulled him up. She said, "Oh, we've been talking," and I said, "Oh, let me find him."
Right.
So I found him, and we investigated, and he looked like a really good guy, and it seemed like what he had been telling her was credible, and so we determined, okay, it's probably safe for you to go meet him. She's going to a restaurant with him, but we still came up with a code word in case she needed me to come get
Right.
her. I knew where she was going to be, and I had her number and everything just in case something happened.
Like that is a much safer mechanism for meeting people and dating than in some ways we used to have. And listen, I know there's a lot of problems that come with online dating. Just pure for I probably shouldn't make this public. My wife and I met online. So, we, I see both the pitfalls, but I also see the benefits from it. And that means to the point that, you were making, Jack,
Yeah.
how everything is interspersed through a screen.
Yeah.
The thing that Elise just mentioned was that before your cousin went and met this guy, there was an investigation,
Yes.
right? Well, what if the guy doesn't have a social media presence? What if the guy doesn't say much on social media? What if he doesn't have a LinkedIn profile? There's also this expectation among both men and women that you have to have this online presence. You have to tick these online certain boxes before, because of whether it's when you're looking for a job through LinkedIn. I mean, oh my God, that process is an appalling process. And then if you're meeting somebody online, it's, there's a reference check
Mhm.
ahead of time, which is I think it's probably challenging for a lot of people, right? But not saying that that's not better than what existed beforehand. But anyway, this is a politics podcast, not a relationship and dating.
I think that actually we'd be really good.
You guys might be. I've definitely
Yeah.
noticed my own limitations here. But how does this fear, maybe this sort of, especially among Gen Z? I mean, people are, when you're younger, you're more, you're dealing with things socially. You're searching for husbands and wives. You're doing all of these things at a time when you're still figuring out your politics. So it's going to frame these things a little bit differently, right? How do you think that dating is affected, or how politics is affected by dating?
I think you see a lot more relationship choice based on politics, where politics is at the forefront of everything
Right.
in a way that it didn't necessarily used to be. Um, and so you have, I think, a lot more people saying, well, I won't date an individual with whom I disagree politically. And that, it's not necessarily bad. It's not necessarily good. People's preferences can be what they want them to be. Who is anybody to tell somebody what their preferences ought to be? But it is interesting. And I think it speaks to the general polarization that we've discussed on this podcast before, that it's infiltrating the realm of romance.
I want to just zero in on the unwillingness to date across party lines, which has been such a growing trend, I think, among our generation. And I will say there's a distinction that it's not necessarily party lines, I would argue. I would say I'm going to speak a little broadly on behalf of the moving left young women. For us and my friends, there is, we have all come to the consensus, we've discussed this many times, it's like, I have no issue dating across party lines. I would have no issue dating someone who identifies as a Republican. However, there is a distinction with the MAGA base due to like Trump's rhetoric and way he talks about women. Like, that divide is the women moving farther left is much more away from Trump than it is away from conservatism and republicanism's true principles, in my belief. It's more the Trump culture wars. It's the way he, quite literally 2 days ago, told a news reporter to quiet Piggy, and everybody just bats an eye. Like, that's just acceptable behavior from the leader of the free world. Like, that is where it's less so Republican, Democrat, more so MAGA, non-MAGA.
So what you brought up, and at least I'm gonna let you jump in here in a second. Taking I'm a middle-aged guy. I get to jump in whenever I want to. That's all part of my prerogative. This notion of the divide is not right versus left. It's MAGA versus everything else. Now, of course, MAGA is only a very small part of the online right. There's all sorts of other components of it, but I can understand where that kind of gets looped in together. Okay. And that's an interesting divide. That's a different divide maybe than usually gets assumed.
Oh.
Okay. Elise, I'm going to let you jump in now. Sorry.
I mean, I can see where you're coming from. I guess my question would be, like, do you think when Trump is no longer like the forefront of the Republican Party, could you see that maybe changing? Because I can see where you're coming from, and I've noticed that a bit too. But I'm just curious, like, do you think that's more fluid, or do you think it'll stay?
I would like to hope so. That is my absolute goal. Like, my biggest fear, and again, like the anger and polarization I feel as a liberal, like under the Trump administration, is more so just like this reoccurring rhetoric that's been so excused for so long, from the 2016, the recording that got released there, like all of this being constantly excused is what's making me worried that it's not going to leave our political system anytime soon. If we've told everybody that the leader of the free world can say this stuff, get by, like scrape free, we've normalized the behavior. We've told all of the young men that are watching him that this is acceptable behavior. And I don't think that's okay. That's why I'm scared it's going to stay.
Okay. I think, and this is where sometimes I think we have when we start to see the world beginning in 2016, 2016 was a response to something. In the era predating 2016, we're going to go back to the late 90s here, there was generally an expectation in politics that you couldn't say anything even remotely controversial to get elected. And political rhetoric, despite the soaring rhetorical heights of Barack Obama, I didn't necessarily think they were as soaring as some, but that's beside the point. With the exception of maybe George W. Bush, who had the propensity to put his foot in his mouth, and yeah, which may have actually been pretty smart strategery on his.
You've misunderestimated.
I've underestimated him, right? That when you take a look at generally what was considered acceptable political discourse, it was so sterile that Trump emerging in 2016 almost felt like a cleanse to a lot of people, I think. And that's why I think that rhetoric got so excused, as it was because it was pushing against a door that to some degree needed to be opened. Whether it needed to be opened in that particular way or not is a completely different question. But that being said, Gen Z, for the most part, especially your part of Gen Z, did not see that earlier era. No. You were birthed into this world of the fiery rhetoric, right? From the perspective of especially between 2010 and 2016, it was really dull as dishwater, what was permissible in public. Trump was almost bound to happen to some degree, whether it was him or somebody else, it was almost bound to happen. So I don't necessarily, to your point, Emma, I actually think it probably will die out a little bit. I don't necessarily think that it's rhetoric like this is sustainable.
I think that's helpful perspective. I will say, like, my very first political involvement, it was the 2016 election. I was writing papers to see if Hillary won versus Trump won. Like that, Trump is all I know of the Republican Party. Right. So it's hard for me to conceptualize the previous.
And actually, in our first podcast with Jack and Jake, one of the things that we talked about was that your entire political consciousness is shaped post 2016. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Your generation only the absolute oldest people of your generation, of Gen Z, the people who are now 29 and 30, can remember even the Obama administration particularly well. Like, do you guys remember? I mean, how old were you in 2016?
School. Oh, in 2016, I was 6th grade.
6th grade. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Elise, how old were you in 2016?
I was 10.
Right. So your whole consciousness is shaped by this post 2016 moment. Mm-hmm. And it just feels like a moment. And I'm older than you guys, but I'm not 20 years older than you guys, but I'm not 50 years older than you guys. Mm-hmm. It feels like a moment. And moments do pass. In 2016, it's hard to remember this, but when Donald Trump won, everybody expected Jeb Bush would win that nomination. Everybody assumed Jeb Bush was going to win that nomination. And in fact, Donald Trump in 2013 wrote an essay criticizing Mitt Romney for being way too harsh on immigrants and on immigration. and that in fact what the Republican Party needed was to fully welcome immigrants into the coalition and be considerably more pro-immigration in rhetoric if they were ever going to win the presidency back. That was Trump's essay in 2013. So something happened.
Yeah, things have changed. Things have changed.
But my point is that moments pass. But I think your point is well taken, Emma, especially on the dating thing. I think that if you're a guy and you embrace the rhetoric of the Trump administration or the primary conservative Republican popular figures, it's not necessarily going to endear you to women, probably.
Absolutely not.
I mean, Jack, you probably can't speak to this. Maybe Elise and Emma, maybe I'll let you guys answer this question.
I will say, like, when I do come across like conservative men, and I was previously in the dating market, and I ran into like a few just instances where it's like you come to the political discussion, a lot of young men in Gen Z, it's actually interesting, as they're going farther to the right, they are less willing to admit that to liberal women because they like to because liberal women like liberal men a lot of the time. And so on dating apps, they're lying about their like politics. They're like not saying they're conservative. And then once they come to the truth, which I had this experience, like it was like, oh, I'm not interested in politics. Then we kind of like had a discussion where it got brought to the forefront. And then it was just kind of like, I expected like a reasonable, rational defense for being able to excuse Donald Trump's rhetoric that I feel is a personal attack on women. And if they cannot do that, then like, yeah, I think that's where I feel like it's a problem between us.
Right. Okay, Elise, let me.
I mean, I would say I don't really have that problem because I specifically am looking for a conservative guy. And so while there are some conservative men where I talk to them and I come away with the conclusion that I would not like to be in a relationship with them because they're a little too, I don't think controlling is the right word, but they tend to have a little bit more, a few more opinions that I would disagree with. Like I know a couple young men who are like, well, I really don't think that women should be working. And I'm like, okay, like I would like to do both. So this is not sustainable. So I would say I have less of a problem because I am specifically looking for this demographic. But even within the demographic, there are some that I wouldn't date.
But still, we're talking about dating in party lines, though.
Yeah,
We're still
that's
talking
true.
about that.
Yeah.
All right. That's interesting. So far, what we've generally talked about is rhetoric, not policies. What are the policies, Emma? I'm going to let you speak for the liberal women at the table, as you know.
Thank you. I'm excited.
I'm gonna refer, because I'm assuming you're chair of the executive committee of liberal women.
Yes, actually, I
Yeah.
was duly elected
Excellent.
on Tuesday.
Okay, wonderful. Well, as chair of the executive committee of liberal women, I'd like you to speak on behalf of liberal women everywhere. No, I'm kidding. What is it policy-wise that you think has shifted young women more to the left?
So something that I saw recently was women are equal in policy, but not in practice in the United States. So, you know, we can work. As of 40 years ago, we were given the right to have our own credit cards, you know, not that far back in history. But the policies that still exist that are pushing women to farther to the right, by far, it's the maternity child care problem. It's in this system, if you want to both have an income and a like real good career, you really have to like wrestle with the fact whether or not you want to be a mom in the capacity you might have wanted to, like be a stay-at-home mom or whatever it is. It's just there really isn't an avenue for women to do both at the moment. And every other major developed country, you know, paid maternity leave, child care is not more expensive than in-state college tuition, like yearly. It's just so unreasonable because women are both expected to be the mothers, and like men are still like, oh, I want a kid, you know, like when they're getting with women. And so they're expected to be the mother, and still expected to sideline their career. And like that's the part that's just like frustrating, is they're like, oh, well, women can work now, you have equal opportunity, but there are these aspects that are making it unequal and that aren't being recognized fairly.
That's completely fair. I'll tell you in my situation, I'll theme here. My wife went to work 5 days after my first daughter was born. She went back to work 5 days after my first daughter was born. Now, that was not required, but what happened is that there was a promotion on the table when she was about 7.5 months pregnant. And the company, it was a small company, and they were like, the only way we can give this, we cannot have you out for 3 months. We cannot give this promotion to somebody who's going to be out for 3 months, which I think is a pretty reasonable thing for a business owner to say, right? So you're welcome to take the 3-week or the 3-month maternity leave, or you get the promotion, right? She took the promotion, right? And has children have never been a barrier to my mother's career. My wife's career. Oh, that was a Freudian slip. That was weird. My wife's career. Or to in my mother's career, she took a bit of a break, but then she went right back full time. But the one of the issues that you're talking about is that I think in the United States, it's easy to imagine that women in other countries have this greater option, but it's not necessarily true. So one of the things that, although women in Canada, for instance, can have up to an 18-month paid maternity leave, the problem is that what that means is that companies don't hire women because they know that or of a woman who's likely to have children soon, because they're not going to hire you to an important position because they know they're going to have to cover that place for 18 months, or they know they're going to have to do that. I'll give you when I was in the finance sector in Canada, I worked very closely with several marketing agents and accountants and men people that were women, and they were in their 30s. It was a revolving door. And in a small because of the constant maternity leaves. And so in a small companies, big companies can afford to do that. Small companies can't. Government can afford to do that. Small companies can't. And so while I think there's this assumption that when a longer maternity leave is going to allow a woman's career to actually be better, it's not necessarily the case. The other aspect is childcare. Now, in other developed countries, childcare is often cheaper, but I will tell you there's fewer spaces because it's cheaper. In the United States, I do not have to worry about finding space for my children in childcare. It is maybe a little more expensive than it could be. It requires a lot of shopping around, okay? But I found relatively affordable full-time childcare for my kids. And I can do that in most markets in the United States. In Canada, I'd have been on an 18-month waiting list, minimum. And so my wife would have had to take the maternity leave in order to accommodate the childcare. So anyway, I bring that up to say this. I'm not trying to undermine your position because I think it's I think you're totally correct. But I think there is a slight misconception about what's going on here, and it's easy to put it into these small bites that I think get lost in the broader global conversation when we just focus on America. And so, but I mean, anyway, I mean, I say all that to say that I think most women are, data aside, it's challenging to manage this notion of a career and childcare. And I think what's needed, to be honest, to make it work is a guy who's willing to partner with you on that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would argue that many of my young age counterparts, they want the wife, they want the children, and they want both to work, but they're not willing to step up in the role of a father, the role of the house taker, like they're understanding that the woman can work, we can all do this together, we can make this possible, like together we can both have jobs and raise a family, but they're not willing to go the extra mile and come into the house and step up, in my opinion.
Well, I'll let my wife say how well I'm not on that. The one thing I would just say on to defend men on this, you don't want to speculate on what they'll do, because honestly, once they see their child, it's pretty amazing, the transformative process. Now, of course, my point in saying that is, I never thought in a million years that I'd want to stay at home with my daughter. Never thought in a million years I'd want to be a stay-at-home dad. But for a year and a half, I was a stay-at-home dad, and it was amazing, basically. Right? And I feel badly that my dad never got that chance, actually. So for guys out there, if you're listening, don't be afraid of that notion. It's actually kind of cool. And I talk to stay-at-home dads at the park now and again. I see them a lot, right? My schedule's a little flexible, so sometimes I take my kids out to the park in the middle. They're at daycare full time, but there's days where they're a little sick or they can't go to daycare, and I go and take them. And you know what? It's pretty great. But anyway, God, I got on my soapbox a lot. I wasn't expecting to have my soapbox a lot. But anyway, Jack, I've let you and I, either one of us being quiet for this loss.
It's not something I'm good at. I'll concede that.
But what do you see in that is in the policy arena that might be driving women to the left?
I think a great deal of it was, in my experience at least, the Dobbs case. When you had that come down, and wherever you stand on that issue, and I know that that's a can of worms, but for many women in my life, that was a watershed moment. Go ahead.
I was just going to add, because one thing we mentioned this Tuesday was the abortion issue has always been one that has existed between the parties. However, with the Dobbs being affected, it brought the dialogue back, and it brought some of the villainization and pointing fingers and things like that back, which is kind of what I thought got women actually pushed women to the left, even though the policies didn't change on either side.
In the stories that have come out of it, there have been a few stories out of Texas where now there's such a high legal threshold to proving that this abortion is necessary to save the life of a mother that doctors will not treat an individual, a woman who comes in, and then they end up suffering horrible health outcomes. Few of these cases have ended at death. And so reading those stories, these absolute worst cases scenarios, is like that in my life, the women that I've known, that has played a huge part in driving them to the left.
Elise?
I would agree that Dobbs was a huge, I don't want to say a turning point moment, but also I think it was because it did bring back, obviously Roe was in 1973, and so none of us were alive for that, and so the rhetoric had, I don't want to say petered out, but it wasn't the forefront of everyone's minds. And then Dobbs happened in 2022, and then everybody was talking about it and thinking about it, and that was when a lot of us were coming of age. So
Right.
I do think that was probably a pretty large contributor.
Right. And I also think that, again, here's where social media and algorithms play a role. You get one horror story, right? And it is made to sound like that is the new norm.
But
Right.
the horror stories weren't normal before, but now they've become normal. We're seeing these come out from all over the South, and this isn't normal. I don't think it's something that can be just accepted.
Well, okay. I mean, let me get back to what is that there are 3 or 4, there are, whenever there's a horror story, it is almost national news, or there are of course horror stories that we don't know about. Don't get me wrong. Okay. And I don't want to pretend that there aren't, but whenever there's a horror story that fits a political narrative, right or left, now in the United States, it is absolutely projected maximally across social media, and your algorithm is going to pick it up. I don't care whether it's ICE deportations, abortions, or some horrible crime committed by an illegal immigrant, something like that. It is all across maximum. If you're on the left wing of the spectrum, your social media is going to throw those horror stories in your face. And if you are on the right side of the political spectrum, your social media algorithm is going to throw those horror stories in your face. And it's hard to actually get a sense of perspective and scale. Right. And that's one of the things that I really struggle with, is trying to figure out how big a problem is this? Are we looking at the fringe? Are we looking at an outlier case? And an outlier case could still be dozens, right? But are we looking at an outlier case? In California, when there was a couple of illegal immigrant truck drivers that were involved in reckless vehicle crashes that led to the death of people, right? And it clearly some dereliction of duty on various officials' part. Is this the norm, or is this just an edge case that's getting blown out of proportion? We don't know, right? Social media doesn't help us with that, right? But I say all that to say that the Dobbs case is,
Yeah.
definitely I think it is a watershed moment, because it allows, if nothing else, for there to be some horror stories that are going to be presented all around the country. But that's not the whole story either, right? Anyway, I don't want to talk about abortion. Oh my God. But I guess what we're coming back to, though, is the battle between the sexes seems to be, from my old man perspective here, battle over what careers and families are going to look like moving forward. That sound about right?
Yeah. It's incredibly, these are age-old questions. And there's a reason why people have written about them. We before the podcast started, we were talking about the Bible and what the Bible has written about these issues. There's a reason it's in there, because people had these questions 2,000 years ago when they were penning those passages. And so social media is a new element to that, I think has complicated things. But I do feel it's important in every issue, not just this issue, to remind ourselves that people have been having these questions for forever. And we may be in a different evolution or iteration of that, but these are not new problems. And having that perspective has really helped me and quite frankly, my mental health in recent years, understanding that this isn't like a doomsday Armageddon thing. This isn't like some new crisis. This is an evolution on things that have existed for forever. That perspective, I think, is important in today's political world.
Yeah, maybe what we're seeing with is this moment where you guys are coming to age at a time when there's some questions that are on the table that have not been on the table for a very long time. And because there's some fluidity, it's kind of creating this anxiety and creating these this political divide, frankly. But anyway, I'm going to let Emma and Elise have the last word here. All right. Who wants to, Emma, I'll let you go first. Okay.
Yeah, I think, Jack, you laid it out well. It's an age-old question for sure. It is interesting to approach it from the post-2016 perspective, because, in my head, it's been inflated since Donald Trump said that one thing that made women mad. Like, that was my understanding of gender conflict, and from there, it's been like that my whole entire political aware period since then. It's been this kind of like very inflamed conversation that seems like reality to me, but really, when I know, looking back further, it is a period of time, and it can be helpful to be reminded of that, because it can feel very frustrating and stuff when I see just everything going around me. It kind of feels like hopeless, and like with all the discussion and arguments that are going on, I don't know, it does feel very divided, but it can be helpful to remind myself that it's a moment. It's a moment.
Yeah, and I would say a potential solution for this is just talking to people, because we can't fix it by self-isolating and then going into our own little groups of, oh, let me go talk to all my female friends because I need to, complain about this, and then I just never go talk to a guy because, like, we have to foster dialogue, I think, and that's what I love about college. It's because we're all kind of thrown in here from all over, and we're all around the same age, and we're all like trying to answer very similar questions in life. What are we gonna do? What do we want our families to look like? Where do we want to end up? And so I think now especially is a great time to meet people, but also just to evaluate, like, what am I looking for in somebody, and make plenty of new friends. And honestly, a great way to meet people is through friends. Like, I've met some really great friends and potential people that I dated and then stopped dating, um, through my friends, because that's just, they already vetted them. They're saying, hey, this is a great person. You should go out with them. So I think talking about it and bringing it offline a little bit more, I think we'll definitely have hope, but we have to be talking.
Yeah. Well, that's what today was all about, right? Anyway, thank you very much, Emma. Thank you for joining us. Elise, Jack, thanks as always for coming on. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.